Hello, everyone. This is just a walkthrough of the DBQ Essay Overview that we've been going over in class over the past few days. Remember that we broke the documents into three categories: plus, plus minus, and minus. Plus means that evidence showed a strong connection between communism and the women's rights movement. Plus minus means that the evidence in the document showed a middling connection between communism and the women's rights movement. And a minus meant that the evidence showed a weak connection between communism and the women's rights movement. Remember that all 7 documents showed some connection, but we categorized them as to which were the strongest and which were the weakest. For your thesis paragraph, remember to include an introductory statement that leads your reader into the topic. Be sure to use language from the question prompt itself. Then, state your thesis, such as communist movements in the 20th century, and then you use a qualifying term such as greatly or moderately or negligibly, depending on what you're going to make for an argument, affected the struggle for women's rights. Lastly, in your opening paragraph, please include a supporting sentence that mentions where and when communism appeared to have had a greater effect on women's rights. This will be determined by the breakdown of the documents and how you analyze them. For instance, perhaps in Asia in the 1960s and 1970s, communism lent more support to the women's rights movement than at other times and places. Don't worry, I see the typo. For your body paragraphs, remember, you need to use 6 of the 7 documents, so decide which ones will provide the greatest evidence to support your thesis. And students are required to source 4 of the 6 documents that they use. In other words, they need to address and explain the author's point of view, the author's purpose, the historical context of the document, in other words, what was going on when it was produced, and the intended audience of the document. Body paragraphs should be broken down by using 3 documents per paragraph. This way you can mention one supporting document, but source 2 of the documents. Your body paragraph 1 should use documents that somewhat support your thesis, while body paragraph 2 should use 3 documents that will strongly support and solidify your thesis. Have your reader ending the essay with the most strong argument and evidence that you have to support your argument. As far as sourcing documents, we talked about some sentence starters to help you in sourcing your documents. In other words, in document 2, the author claims, and then write down what he or she claims. This claim has been made too, and then talk about the purpose. This was done or said in the backdrop of, and this hints at context. In this context, the author intended to address who was the author's audience. And lastly, and most importantly, how does this evidence support your argument? So once you have sourced the document, you also want to talk about how this continues to support your argument. Your conclusion paragraph has to have these 3 components: contextualization, outside evidence, and synthesis. With context, you want to be thinking about time and place. The time span that we're talking about is the 20th century. You want to consider what was happening during the 20th century for both phenomena that the essay addresses: communism and women's rights. Both were growing in popularity and support at this time. States were beginning to embrace communism. Women were fighting for the right to vote throughout the world, not just the United States. The Cold War was part of the political and economic backdrop during this period. And the United States and Soviet Union would have competed in the arena of women's rights as they did in all arenas, including atomic weapons, the space race, and the Olympics, among others. As far as outside evidence, you have to be thinking about propaganda that was being produced to support women's rights everywhere, not just in the communist world. Perhaps speeches from other communist leaders that may have supported the women's struggle for rights. And one point that I mentioned in class was that the Soviet Army employed women during and after World War II in positions of leadership and authority, something that Western democracies were not doing just yet. And again, you're going to have a sentence or 2 here to contextualize, a sentence or 2 here to bring in outside evidence, and then a sentence or 2 to synthesize. And this is all part of your concluding paragraph. So this, for synthesizing, you were just doing one of 3 things: thinking about a different period or a different theme or a different discipline. For a different period, we thought about the Age of Enlightenment leading to political industrial revolutions, much the same way that communism led to an increase in women's rights. A different theme, there were many different themes listed, but one we talked about in class was economics and the burden women face to struggle for economic as well as political equality. And a different discipline, I just threw in art history, focusing on the use of emotive imagery to sway public opinion and government policy, much like the poster that came from the Cultural Revolution in China in the 1960s, among the documents that you worked with.